It was the clink of silverware that stopped me. Not the noise itself, but the silence that followed it. One of those sharp, sudden silences that feels like a door slamming inside your chest. I was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding the gravy boat, smiling politely as everyone at the dining table laughed at a joke I hadn't heard. The room was glowing, soft golden lights from the chandelier, garland wrapped around the banister, my late husband's antique clock ticking steadily above the fireplace. And then my daughter-in-law, Denise, placed a crisp manila envelope on top of her linen napkin and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "We figure it's time to make things official. You've had your fun living here rent-free." The smile froze on my face. Across the table, my son Jacob didn't look up. He just kept slicing the roast like this was a normal conversation to be having on Christmas Eve. My granddaughter Ella reached for the cranberry sauce, eyes downcast, as if pretending not to notice the tension now threading its way around the table. No one said anything. I walked slowly to the table and set the gravy down, the porcelain clinking just a little louder than necessary. Then I took my seat at the head of the table, the one my husband always sat at before he passed. I pulled the envelope toward me, with steady fingers. I already knew what it was. I didn't have to open it to know. But I did. Inside was a rental agreement. My name printed at the top. A monthly rate, due date, and a list of expectations typed in the coldest Times New Roman font I'd ever seen. At the bottom, 2 blank signature lines. Mine and Jacob's. I looked up. Jacob finally met my gaze. "It's just fair, Mom. We're all adults here." "All adults," I echoed, my voice quieter than I intended. "I see." Denise smiled tightly. "You've had the upstairs to yourself for 2 years now. Utilities aren't cheap. We're trying to build for Ella's future." "Of course," I said. They all returned to their plates. The clatter resumed. Conversations picked back up. It was as if I hadn't been handed a contract, like an unwelcome tenant in my own son's home. I didn't cry. I didn't protest. I simply folded the paper and placed it neatly beside my plate. I cut a piece of turkey and took a bite, even though I couldn't taste a thing. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that this home wasn't theirs to begin with. 27 years ago, when my husband and I bought this house, it was nothing but a broken-down fixer-upper with good bones and bad plumbing. We raised Jacob in it, painted every wall ourselves, rebuilt the back porch when it collapsed during that freak snowstorm in '94. My husband died right in this living room, with my hand in his, breathing the same air we'd shared for 4 decades. After he passed, I couldn't bear to live alone. Jacob insisted I move in. "It's your house too," he'd said back then. "You're not just family, Mom. You're home." He'd meant it, I think, once. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Denise got more opinionated. Jacob got quieter. I started getting left off grocery lists. My name was never on the outgoing Christmas cards. I became, slowly, the background. Still, I stayed. Because I believed I was helping. I took Ella to school every morning. I cooked dinner 5 nights a week. I did laundry, changed sheets, kept the garden alive. And now they wanted rent. After dinner, they didn't mention it again. Denise poured wine and turned on a movie. Jacob dozed off in his recliner. I gathered the dishes, washed them alone like always. The contract stayed tucked in my apron pocket. At 11:42 p.m., I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The house was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher. I pulled the envelope back out and read it again. There was a handwritten note paper-clipped to the last page. In Denise's sharp, cursive hand. "Hope this doesn't come off as cold. Just want to set healthy boundaries going forward. We'll need your signature before the 1st. Healthy boundaries." I chuckled. Not bitterly. Just in disbelief. In that moment, something inside me shifted, not like an explosion, more like a click. A realization. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about utilities or fairness. This was about erasure, about control, about slowly rewriting who I was in this home. I stood, walked to my old cedar chest in the guest room, my room, though Denise had started calling it the bonus space. I unlocked it and pulled out a folder. Inside was the deed to the house, the original mortgage agreement, my name, my husband's name, and Jacob's name missing. Because we never added him. Not when we bought it, not after he got married, not when I moved back in. I looked at that paper like it was a life raft. Because it was. They didn't know. They thought they owned the future of this house. They thought I was a burden, one they could invoice into silence. But they were wrong. I sat down and wrote a letter. Not a petty one. Just facts. A record of what this home meant. Of what I'd done. Of what I'd built. And what I still owned. When I was done, I placed it in an envelope and slid it into the same manila folder they had given me. I sealed it and wrote 3 words across the front in thick black ink. You forgot me. Then I tucked it into the mailbox for Jacob to find in the morning. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Because the rent they asked for? They were about to learn what it really cost. Before we continue, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to more powerful stories like this one. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from sadness, but from a kind of clarity that feels like electricity buzzing under the skin. You'd think, after being blindsided with a contract at the Christmas table, I'd be hurt. And I was. But what kept me awake wasn't grief. It was purpose. At 6:10 a.m., I stepped outside in my robe, boots crunching on the frost-covered porch, and placed the sealed envelope into the mailbox. The air was sharp and clean, the kind that wakes your whole body up. Jacob always checked the mail first thing. He was particular about that, as if bills might melt in sunlight. So I waited, not near the door. I didn't need to hover. I made coffee, cracked the window, and let the chill mix with the scent of the brew. At 6:34, I heard it, the creak of the front door, the jingle of his keys, the metal flap of the mailbox lifting. Silence. Then a pause that felt long enough to build a decade inside it. And then the door slammed shut. I stayed in the kitchen, swirling honey into my mug with a steady hand. 5 minutes later, his footsteps approached. Mom, I turned. Jacob stood in the kitchen doorway, still holding the envelope. His face was pale, mouth a little slack like the words he needed had slipped through the cracks in his pride. He set the envelope on the counter. Why didn't you ever tell me your name's still on the deed? I didn't think I had to, I said gently. It's the same name on every mortgage statement, every property tax bill. It's the same name on the title that paid for this roof. Denise appeared behind him, wrapped in her silk robe, arms crossed like armor. This isn't about paperwork, she snapped. It's about boundaries. About fairness. Boundaries are a two-way street, I replied, still calm. You're standing in a home you don't own, asking for rent from someone who does. That stopped her. She blinked. I walked to the sink, poured myself a glass of water, and faced them both. You thought this house was yours to control. Because I've been quiet. Because I haven't thrown it in your faces. Because I cook and clean and tiptoe around your moods like a guest in my own home. No one asked you to tiptoe, Denise started. No, I interrupted, sharper now. But you didn't stop me either. And silence, Denise, is a decision. Jacob finally found his voice. We thought with Ella heading to college soon, things would be easier if we had clear terms. Clear terms, I repeated, then nodded. You're right. Let's get some. I walked past them to the hallway closet and retrieved a folder labeled Household Agreement, Revised. I had stayed up half the night drafting it. It was blunt, factual, legal. Inside were new terms, a lease, yes, but for them. Because, as of that morning, they were now my tenants. They could stay, but rent would be due on the 1st of every month. Utilities split 3 ways. I'd remain in the master bedroom. They could have the upstairs guest suite. No more using my credit card for grocery apps. No more borrowing my car, without asking. And no more disrespecting the hands that made their lives comfortable. I handed the folder to Jacob. He didn't open it. Not yet. Denise laughed, though it cracked at the edges. You're serious? As a deed, I said, not smiling. She looked to Jacob. Are you going to let her do this? He glanced between us, his mother and his wife, and for the first time in years, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was embarrassment. Maybe just the slow dawning of realization that I wasn't going to bend anymore. He didn't say anything. "I'll give you 2 days to decide," I said, walking back toward the kitchen. "Sign the lease or find somewhere else by the end of the month. Your choice." And with that, I poured myself another cup of coffee and added a little extra cream. For the first time in years, it tasted exactly how I liked it because I made it for me. They didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. Denise left the house around 10 a.m. without a word. Jacob mowed the lawn like it was a military assignment. Ella never came down from her room. The silence was golden. That evening, I lit a candle in the den and pulled out my husband's old records. Walter loved jazz. I hadn't played his vinyl since he passed. But that night, I sat on the couch, glass of wine in hand, and let Miles Davis fill the room with notes that felt like memory. I was no longer waiting for a seat at their table. I was reclaiming the head of mine. The next morning, a knock sounded on my door. Not the front one. My bedroom. Jacob stood there, eyes bloodshot. "We didn't mean to make you feel like a guest in your own house." "You didn't make me feel anything," I said. "You just reminded me who I am." He stepped in, hesitant. "Are you really kicking us out?" I paused. "No," I said. "But I'm done letting you erase me. You want to live here? Fine. But from now on, it's going to be as equals or not at all." He nodded slowly, then held out the folder I'd given him. The lease. Signed by both him and Denise. I took it, my hand steady. "Thanks, Jacob," I said. "You can leave the rent in the mailbox by the 1st. He gave a sheepish smile. "You're serious about that?" "I'm serious about a lot of things now." As he walked away, I felt it. Not triumph, not revenge. Balance. And that was just the beginning. 2 days after Jacob and Denise signed the lease, the house was quieter than it had been in years. Not because people stopped talking. No, they still moved about, still took calls on speakerphone and bickered over what to watch on TV. But the silence was inside me. A stillness, a clearing of space that used to be cluttered with compromise and the ache of being overlooked. For the first time in years, I no longer felt like I was tiptoeing around my own home. I made my coffee stronger. I played music in the afternoons. I even took up knitting again, leaving my yarn basket out on the armchair without worrying that Denise would scoff and call it clutter. I had started reclaiming the house, one room, one drawer, one unspoken rule at a time. But there was one room I hadn't stepped into since everything shifted: Walter's study. He died in that room 9 years ago, quietly, without fanfare. He had fallen asleep in the recliner with a book in his lap and never woken up. I still hadn't moved the bookmark. Page 213. The things we own often outlive the people who love them. I hadn't had the heart to touch the space much since. But that morning, I opened the door. The air inside was still, a little dusty. Light streamed in through the blinds, illuminating the bookshelf, the framed photos on the desk, the same paperweight Ella had made in 2nd grade still sitting there, a ceramic heart painted purple and gold, chipped on one corner. I walked to the writing desk and ran my fingers across the surface. Walter's handwriting was still scrawled in the notepad beside the pen holder. I sat down slowly, opened the drawer, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. And I started to write. Not to them, Jacob or Denise or even Ella. To myself. "Dear Lorraine, you have spent most of your life giving without keeping track. You gave meals. You gave money. You gave time and stories and forgiveness. And with every gift, you carved yourself a little smaller to make room for everyone else. You raised a son, and then helped raise his daughter. You buried a husband with grace. You endured grief without turning bitter. You loved without ledger marks. But somewhere along the way, they forgot. Or maybe they never truly knew what it cost to be their constant. You are not just the woman who washes dishes in silence. You are not a spare room or a placeholder or a financial plan they never discuss with you. You are a builder, a maker, a protector. You taught your son how to tie his shoes, how to ride a bike, how to be brave at the dentist. You held his hand when Denise walked down the aisle. You paid the down payment on their first car when he lost his job. You watched Ella when they were too tired to parent. And you never asked for anything in return but respect. Now it's time. Not for revenge. Not even for apology. But for truth. You do not owe your life to the people who only notice you when they need something. You owe it to yourself to stand tall in the space you've always held for others. You are not too old. You are not in the way. You are the root. And without you, they fall. Love yourself. I folded the letter and placed it in a new envelope. I didn't seal it. I kept it in the top drawer of the desk, like a compass I could return to whenever I felt myself shrinking again. Later that afternoon, Ella came downstairs. She was scrolling through her phone as she wandered into the kitchen. She barely looked up. "Grandma," she said casually, "can you sign this?" She handed me a form, some kind of permission slip for a summer leadership retreat. I looked at the line that read, "Parent/Guardian signature," and slowly handed it back. "I think you'll need your parent's signature for that," I said. She blinked. "But you always do it." "I used to," I replied. "But things are different now." She stared at me for a long beat. "You're mad, aren't you?" I didn't sigh. I didn't roll my eyes. I looked her straight in the face.
"No, Ella."
"I'm not mad. I'm just finally choosing myself." She scoffed under her breath and left the kitchen, but not before I saw it. The way her shoulders sagged. Not in defiance. In confusion.
"Good."
Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. I had spent decades explaining myself. Now they could learn to listen without being spoon-fed. That night, I took down the Christmas decorations alone. The ones they hadn't touched. I wrapped the ornaments in tissue, packed away the garland, and left the stockings in a box marked "Keep," but this time, I didn't hang them back in the hallway closet. I drove them to a storage unit the next morning, rented in my name only. I wasn't getting rid of the memories. I was protecting them, because it finally hit me. I couldn't control how they saw me, but I could control how I held myself. And I was done giving away the best parts of me to people who only valued what I provided, not who I was. On Sunday, I made myself a solo brunch. Pancakes with blueberries, crispy bacon, a glass of orange juice, and my favorite record playing softly in the background. Jacob knocked once before stepping into the dining room. "We're heading out," he said. "Brunch with Denise's family." I didn't look up from my book. "Have a nice time." He lingered. "We'll be back late." I flipped the page. "The door locks at 10. He blinked. "What?" "I changed the locks, remember?" I said without looking up. "If you're going to live here, the rules apply to everyone." He gave a half nod, half laugh.
"Right."
"Okay." Then he left, and I turned another page. The chapter one was reading was called "The Woman Who Reclaimed Her Life." I liked the sound of that. It was almost a week before Denise spoke to me directly again. Not passive-aggressive one-liners. Not whispers under her breath. A real conversation. Or at least her version of one. She caught me in the kitchen while I was brewing tea. I'd just come in from the garden, dirt still under my nails, hair pinned up haphazardly with a pencil. The late January sun slanted through the window above the sink, warm and golden, lighting up the countertop between us. "You've been acting different," she said, arms crossed over her Lululemon zip-up. Colder. I stirred honey into my cup and didn't look up. "I've been acting more like myself." She exhaled like that was exhausting. "We're just trying to build a life here, Lorraine. A future for Ella. I'm sorry if we've made you feel pushed out." I turned and leaned against the counter. "You didn't make me feel anything, Denise. You simply stopped pretending I mattered once I stopped making your life easier." Her eyes flickered. "Don't you think," she began, voice gentling, "that this is all a bit much? The lease? The rules? The locked door?" "You handed me a rental agreement at Christmas dinner," I reminded her. "You made it official. So I simply returned the favor." She tried to smile. "Look, maybe we could reevaluate. I'm sure Ella would appreciate a little more normalcy around here." I raised an eyebrow. "Normalcy? Like the kind where I quietly clean your dishes while you pretend I'm the maid? That's not fair."
"No, Denise."
"What's not fair is being erased in the house I built." She didn't argue again. She just looked at me, really looked, and for the first time I think she saw me not as the background noise but as a woman with eyes that didn't flinch anymore. "I just hope," she said softly, "you're not doing this to punish us." And that was the moment I saw her clearly, not as cruel, but as entitled. So used to my sacrifices that boundaries felt like an attack. I set my tea down and leaned forward just enough for her to hear the firmness in my voice. "This isn't punishment, Denise. This is preservation of myself." And with that, I left her standing there, blinking like someone who just realized the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. That evening, I sat on the back porch wrapped in a thick sweater, watching the garden rest beneath the winter soil. The rose bushes had been pruned back weeks ago, and the earth looked barren. But I knew better. I'd been gardening long enough to recognize the stillness before the bloom. Jacob stepped outside a few minutes later. He held 2 mugs of cocoa and offered one without speaking. We sat in silence, the kind that used to scare me. Now it felt like a friend. "I read the letter," he said quietly. I didn't need to ask which one. I had left it in Walter's study, sitting on the desk next to his old notepad. The letter I wrote to myself. The one that reminded me of who I was before they stopped seeing me. "I think I forgot," he continued. "What you gave. What you held together." I sipped my cocoa, letting the silence stretch. He needed to fill it, not me. "I was scared," he finally admitted. "Scared that if we didn't start taking control, we'd drown financially. College, mortgage, the market, everything." "And so you looked around," I said, "and decided the easiest person to leverage was the quietest one in the house." He winced. "I didn't think of it that way." "You didn't think of it at all," I replied, not cruel, just honest. "That's the problem." We sat a while longer. The stars started blinking awake in the sky, and for a moment, I remembered holding him out here when he was 7, wrapped in a blanket after a fever, whispering constellations into his ears to help him sleep. He turned to me now. "Can we fix this?" "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But we can start with honesty." The next morning, I got a call from Ella's school counselor. "Hi, Mrs. Langford. I'm reaching out because Ella submitted an essay for the scholarship committee, and it mentioned some family changes. I just wanted to confirm you're all right. She spoke about you with a lot of emotion." I was quiet for a moment. "She did?" I asked.
Yes.
"She wrote that you've always been the one who made everyone feel safe, even when no one thought to ask how you were feeling." The lump in my throat surprised me. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, holding that phone like it was something sacred. Maybe the shift was happening. Slowly, like roots pushing through thawing soil. Later that night, I found a handwritten note on my pillow. "Grandma, I miss how things used to be. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought you'd always be there."
Ella.
I held the note against my chest and let myself grieve the girl I used to hold, the one who used to slip her hand into mine without thinking. And I whispered aloud, "I'm still here, Ella. Just no longer invisible." I didn't forgive them instantly. I didn't go back to folding their laundry or baking their favorite muffins just to feel needed again. But something had shifted. Not in them, at least not fully.
In me.
I had stopped needing to be liked in order to be valid. Stopped performing worthiness. Stopped auditioning for a role I already played perfectly for decades. And that, more than any document or confrontation, was the most radical thing I had ever done. I didn't slam doors. I simply stopped unlocking them for people who never knocked. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind where the world still felt half asleep. The frost on the windows hadn't melted yet, and I was wrapped in my robe, stirring oatmeal on the stove when the landline rang. No one really used it anymore. Most calls were spam or reminders from dentists. But something about the ring this time made me pause. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. "Lorraine Langford speaking." "Mrs. Langford? This is Naomi Fields from Hawthorne and Grant Law Associates. I hope I haven't caught you at a bad time." I almost laughed. Mornings with oatmeal and solitude were sacred now. But her tone was so serious, so formal, that I sat down instinctively. "I'm calling on behalf of our client, Mr. Russell Whitmore," she continued. He passed away 3 weeks ago and named you as a beneficiary in his final will and testament. My fingers tightened around the receiver.
I.
I'm sorry, I don't think I know a Russell Whitmore. There was a pause. Then papers shuffled on the other end. According to our records, he was a client at the public library where you once worked. He referenced you in a letter attached to the will. I blinked. That name. It flickered like a distant light in the fog. Russell Whitmore. The man who used to come in every Thursday, like clockwork. Tall, wiry, always wore a navy peacoat even in summer. He had a stutter when he got nervous and preferred old mystery novels no one else ever checked out. He never spoke much, but when he did, it was kind. I'd helped him once when his library card had expired, and he was too embarrassed to ask for a renewal. I walked him through the paperwork, gave him a cup of tea from the staff lounge, even slipped a note into one of his books. Good minds are never truly alone. That had been over 10 years ago. I remember him, I said quietly. But I don't understand. Why would he include me in his will? Well, ma'am, the attorney said gently, that's part of the surprise. 2 days later, I stood outside a modest brownstone on the edge of town. Naomi, the attorney, met me at the gate. Her coat was immaculate. Her eyes kind, curious. She handed me a manila envelope without a word. Inside was the letter. Dear Lorraine, years ago, you treated a man with no one like he was someone. You reminded me I had worth. You didn't know it, but I came to the library because it was the only place I could go where someone smiled at me without asking for something in return. You once told me that even the forgotten deserve stories. I never forgot that. I don't have family, but I have memory. And I remember you. This house is yours now. I hope it gives you the peace you gave me. My knees went weak. I had to sit on the garden bench out front. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was beautiful in its own quiet way. Red brick, ivy climbing the sides, a small garden blooming even in winter from the warmth of the basement pipes. It's been well cared for, Naomi said. Mr. Whitmore kept everything meticulous. No debts. It's yours, free and clear. Mine, a second home. Not out of entitlement, not out of obligation, but out of quiet recognition. I ran my hand along the iron railing. For years, I had poured every drop of myself into people who forgot me the moment I stopped giving. And yet here was a man I barely knew who remembered everything. That evening, I returned to the house, my house, and stood in the backyard, staring at the little oak tree standing proudly in the corner of the garden. I sat down on the porch step and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because life is absurd sometimes. You give your soul to those who see you as wallpaper. And one small act of kindness you barely remember becomes the cornerstone of someone else's legacy. I didn't tell Jacob or Denise that night. I didn't say a word. Instead, I pulled out my old journal and wrote. Maybe this is the chapter where I choose myself completely, where the life I forgot I deserved comes back to find me. The next day, I returned to the brownstone with a bag of groceries, a new set of keys, and my notebook. The interior was tidy, a little dusty, but welcoming. Warm wood floors, bookshelves lining every wall, a fireplace that still worked. There was a rocking chair in the corner, just waiting for someone to read by it. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's life. I felt home. I set a kettle on the stove and opened a window. Fresh air rushed in, crisp and alive. I was still Lorraine, still a mother, still a grandmother. But in this space, I was something else, too. I was a woman remembered. I stayed there that night. No phone calls, no messages. I left a note at the old house saying I'd be gone for a few days. Let them wonder. Let them sit in the space I once filled. They wouldn't find me in the laundry room, or the kitchen, or folding Ella's clothes into perfect squares. They would find an empty chair at the table and realize what it had meant all along. The next morning, I sat on the front porch with my tea, watching the light climb slowly over the ivy-covered bricks. The world didn't need to change. I had. And I wasn't going back. The first morning I didn't make breakfast, they noticed. Not immediately. But by 9:12 a.m., I imagined Denise had opened the fridge to find no fresh eggs, no stacked Tupperware, no folded list with weekly meals pinned to the corkboard by the stove. I had even taken my recipe cards, the ones she once called quaint, off the shelf above the toaster. By noon, Jacob texted, "You didn't come home last night. Are you okay?" It was the first time in weeks he'd asked how I was without following it with a request. I didn't reply. I was in the sunroom of my new house, the one Russell left me. I'd opened the windows. A breeze drifted through lace curtains. My tea sat steaming beside a stack of books I hadn't touched in years, novels I always meant to read once I had time. Now I had time. And space. And air that didn't carry the weight of expectation. That afternoon, I walked down to the corner bakery and bought a lemon tart just for myself. Not to share. Not to present on a tray to others with a cloth napkin. Just for me. It was tart and sweet and bright, and I savored every bite like it was my first meal in decades. When I returned to the house, there was a letter in the mail slot. No return address. Handwritten. Familiar slant. "Please come home. Ella is asking about you. She's scared you're angry forever." Denise won't say it, but she's nervous too. I think we all are. I read it twice. Once with my eyes, once with my heart. And then I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer labeled reflection, not reaction. Because I was no longer responding to fear. I was responding to truth. 3 days passed. I stayed in the brownstone, fixing small things around the house, replacing cabinet handles, polishing Walter's old brass bookends I had brought from the other home. I made a list of everything I wanted to do in this new space. Start the memoir. Build a small herb garden.
Volunteer again at the library.
Host a tea once a month for women like me, quiet givers, often forgotten. I'd call it the table reclaimed. Because that's what this all felt like, taking back the chair I had earned. No longer waiting for a place someone else would allow me to have. It wasn't until Sunday that they really felt it. I know because Sunday used to be my day. I made pot roast. Real mashed potatoes. The green beans Ella would only eat if I cooked them with lemon and garlic, just like Walter used to love. I served it all on the same ceramic dishes I had bought the year Jacob was born. A full set, gifted to myself with my own paycheck. Every Sunday, like clockwork, I made that house feel like home. Until this Sunday. This Sunday, I sat in my own dining room, linen napkin folded neatly on my lap, candle flickering beside a single plate. I ate quietly, gracefully, and they ate whatever Denise threw together, I imagine. Likely from a microwave. Likely with tension. Later that night, a message lit up my phone. "Jacob, we saved your seat tonight. The food didn't taste the same without you." There it was. The ghost of gratitude. But I didn't respond. Not yet. Not because I was punishing him. Because I had learned the difference between an apology born of discomfort and one born of accountability. And I was waiting for the latter. The next morning, I visited the library. The one where I had once spent 10 years alphabetizing, listening to first-time readers stumble through sentences, guiding retirees to new passions. The new director, Melissa, greeted me with a hug that smelled like vanilla and printer ink. "Lorraine," she beamed. "We've missed you." The kids still ask if the quiet woman with the kind eyes is coming back. I laughed. Maybe she is. But not so quiet anymore. Melissa gave me a tour of the renovated children's section. The chairs were newer, the colors brighter, but the spirit remained. She paused near the windowed reading nook. "Would you be open to leading storytime again?" I turned to the shelf and picked up an old favorite, The Giving Tree. A bittersweet choice. But this time I knew I wasn't the tree anymore, not the one who gave everything until there was only a stump left. I was the forest now, and I was growing back. "I'd love to," I said. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the chimney stacks of Russell's house, I wrote the first line of my memoir. I stopped setting the table for people who only ever came to eat. I paused, staring at the words. They didn't ache. They rang.
True. Whole. Clear.
It was a rainy Thursday when I heard the knock at the door. Not loud. Not urgent. Just steady. I had just set down a tray of lemon scones to cool when it came. The house smelled like butter and citrus, and Ella's old scarf, the one I'd found tucked away in my sewing cabinet, was draped across the back of the armchair where I'd mended it the night before. I hadn't told anyone where this house was. Not formally. But I had a feeling. When I opened the door, she was standing there.
Ella.
Hair tucked under a hood, backpack slung over one shoulder, sneakers soaked. Her eyeliner was smudged, either from the rain or from something heavier. Her arms hung limp at her sides, fingers twitching like they wanted to fidget, but she didn't let them. "Hi," she said, so softly I barely heard her. I stepped aside without a word, and she entered. It was the first time she'd ever been in a space that was mine. Not the spare room I slept in, not the kitchen I worked in.
Mine.
She looked around slowly, taking in the warm lighting, the stack of books by the window, the row of dried herbs hanging above the sink. "You live here now?" she asked, her voice small. "I do," I said calmly. "Would you like tea?" She nodded. I poured 2 cups and handed hers in silence. She sat on the armchair with the scarf, but didn't comment on it. Just held the tea like it was an anchor. Then finally she spoke. "I didn't come to ask for anything." That surprised me. I sat across from her. "Then why did you come?" "I read what you wrote," she said quietly, eyes on her mug. "The scholarship essay that girl shared. The one about Russell. And the article you published for the library blog. Mom showed it to me. I guess she thought I should know." I waited. "It made me cry," she admitted. Not because it was sad, but because it felt like I knew the woman in the story. And then I realized I didn't. "Not really." Her voice cracked. "I thought you'd always be there. Not in a selfish way. Just you were always there. I never asked what you needed. I never said thank you. I let Mom make you small." She looked up. "I'm sorry, Grandma." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. This girl I had cradled, fed, comforted, protected. This girl who had once clutched my skirt in grocery stores and fallen asleep on my shoulder with sticky fingers and cotton candy breath. Now she was 18, almost grown, but not finished. Still figuring out how to see people as more than what they gave. "I forgive you," I said. She swallowed hard. "Even after what I said? Even after what you forgot?" I replied. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them. She just whispered, "Can I come visit sometimes? Just to be with you. Not for help. Not for money. Just because." I reached across the small table and took her hand. "I'd like that," I said. And for the first time in a long while, I held my granddaughter, not as someone to rescue, but as someone returning. Not perfectly, but honestly. Later that evening, after she left, I walked to the garden and stood under the weeping cherry tree out back. The petals were just beginning to bloom, despite the cold. I thought about Russell, about Walter, about the women like me, quiet builders, invisible anchors. I thought about how many of us never get to see what blooms after we stop giving everything away. But I was seeing it now. I was living in it. That night, a storm rolled in. Wind rattled the windows. Thunder cracked like memory. And around 10:37 p.m., my phone rang again. It was Jacob. I almost didn't answer, but something in my chest told me to listen. "Mom," he said, his voice tense. "There's a leak. In the upstairs bathroom. Water's dripping through the ceiling. I think the pipe finally burst." I closed my eyes. Of course. That house was old. Denise had ignored the repair estimate I left months ago on the fridge, one they dismissed as overcautious. "I'm sorry," he added. "I know it's late. We don't know what to do." There it was. The quiet reaching. Not for money. Not for a fix. For me. The woman who had always known what to do. "I'll call a plumber in the morning," I said. "I still have the old contractor's number." "You do that?" "I already did," I said, smiling. 3 days ago. Asked him to do a full inspection of the property while I was gone. Just in case. Jacob exhaled, caught between relief and shame. "I never deserved you," he whispered. "No," I said gently. "You didn't. But you still have a chance to honor me now. Silence. I'll try, he said. Good, I replied. Because I don't rescue anymore. I support from a distance. That's the new arrangement.
He didn't argue.
He just said, thank you. And meant it. It was early spring by the time the cherry blossoms outside Russell's brownstone were in full bloom. Pale pink petals drifted across the front steps like confetti, celebrating a kind of rebirth that felt earned. I had started keeping a new journal, separate from the one filled with the ache of my old life. This one was titled Reclamation. Not revenge, not grief, just the steady, quiet climb back to myself. The herb garden was thriving. I'd planted basil, rosemary, thyme, and lavender along the south fence, and every morning I walked barefoot onto the porch with my tea and let the scent remind me that I was no longer living someone else's life. And then one Tuesday morning, I did something no one expected. I mailed 3 invitations. Not emails, not texts. Printed, hand-cut, carefully written invitations, sealed with wax and a pressed petal from the tree outside. One to Jacob, one to Denise, and one to Ella. Each read, "You are invited to dinner. Saturday, 6:30 p.m. at my new home. This table has rules. Come curious, not combative. Speak plainly, not performatively. Listen more than you talk. And no one, under any circumstances, touches their phone. RSVP by Friday. Lorraine." By Thursday, I received 3 envelopes slipped under my front door, all marked yes. Saturday came quickly. I cooked, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. But this time, the dishes weren't old favorites. They were mine. A recipe I'd wanted to try for years but never dared because it wasn't comfort food. No pot roast. No mashed potatoes. Tonight was rosemary lemon chicken with wild rice pilaf, grilled peaches, and a blood orange salad. I set the table for 4. No placeholders. No folded napkins with names. Just white plates, crystal glasses, a vase of fresh lavender. I didn't place myself at the head of the table. I placed myself at the center. They arrived on time. Denise was the first to say anything as she stepped through the door. "This place is beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "It's mine." She nodded, eyes scanning the room slowly, as if trying to reconcile the woman she'd known with the one standing confidently in linen and silver earrings. Jacob followed silently, a bottle of wine in his hand, and Ella trailed behind, holding a small potted succulent. "It's for your windowsill," she said, cheeks flushed. "I thought it kind of looked like you." I smiled and took it. "Then I hope it's quiet but hard to kill." She laughed nervously. We sat. There was a long moment, perhaps the longest of my life, where no one said a word. And then I broke the silence. "This isn't a reunion. It's a reckoning." All 3 of them stilled. "I'm not here to guilt you. I'm not asking for apologies. But I want clarity. And I want it out loud." Denise shifted in her seat. Jacob looked down at his lap. But Ella, of all people, spoke first. "You felt invisible," she said. "And we didn't notice until you vanished." I looked at her. "That's true. I think we assumed you were fine, because you always seemed fine," she continued. "But we never asked. We never gave. We just expected." She looked around the table. "We all did." Jacob cleared his throat. "Mom, I've been thinking about it a lot. You were always the one holding the threads together. And we never once stopped to wonder what happened if you let go." I raised an eyebrow. "And what had happened?" He swallowed. "Everything started to unravel."
Good.
Then Denise, of all people, surprised me. "I wasn't raised to notice people like you," she said, voice brittle but steady. "My mother believed that women should give, and if they didn't, they were cold. I think I punished you for not breaking, for still being kind even when I was cruel." It was quiet after that, until I spoke again. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "But I am changed. And I'm not coming back." Denise looked up, startled. "I don't mean I'm disappearing. I mean, I won't return to being the version of myself that existed just to make everyone else comfortable." "I understand," Jacob said quietly. Do you? Yes, he said. Because when you left, the house felt emptier than it ever did when you lived in the guest room. That struck something in all of us. I nodded, then lifted my wineglass. To the woman I used to be, I said. She served her purpose. And now she gets to rest. We all raised our glasses. Even Denise. After dinner, I brought out a stack of papers, copies of the house deed, financial statements, documents I had quietly prepared. I've signed over the house, I said. Jacob stiffened. To who? To the Hawthorne Women's Support Center. It will become a transitional home for women re-entering the workforce. Those who gave too much, who lost their voices, who were told they didn't matter. I looked them all in the eye. I spent years building that home, and now it will be filled with people who understand what that means. Jacob blinked. Denise's jaw clenched.
Ella?
She smiled. That's kind of incredible, she whispered. No, I said softly. It's exactly incredible. As they were leaving, Ella lingered. Can I come help? At the women's house? I want to learn. I touched her cheek gently. You already are. And then she hugged me. Not out of habit. Out of love. That night, I washed the dishes slowly, humming a tune I hadn't sung in years. The house was quiet, but full. Full of choices I had made. Full of stories I would no longer whisper. And full of peace I didn't beg for. Because I had stopped setting the table for those who took and started serving only where I was seen. 2 weeks after the dinner, life settled into a rhythm again, gentler, quieter, but not empty. The brownstone felt more like home each day. I had framed Walter's old photograph and placed it above the fireplace, right beside a candle I lit every evening. My herb garden was thriving. The Tuesday Women's Circle, the table reclaimed, had grown from 3 members to 9. Every week, we sat around my dining table sharing stories no one else had ever asked us to tell. Widows, grandmothers, divorcees, caretakers. Women who had once folded themselves into corners just to be tolerated.
And now?
We filled every inch of that room with laughter, with truth, with the soft strength of survival. I had no plans to look back. But then, on a Friday afternoon, I opened my mailbox and saw it. A letter. From a return address in Vermont. And a name I hadn't seen in decades. Melanie Hart. It took me a moment to place it. And then it hit me like a gust of cold wind against bare skin. Melanie was my sister. We hadn't spoken in nearly 23 years. She was 5 years older than me, and as children, she had been everything I wasn't. Brash, beautiful, bold. She left home at 17, lived in 4 states before she was 25, and made it very clear that family was a thing to visit, not cling to. Our falling out hadn't been dramatic. It had been something worse. Quiet. She didn't show up to Walter's funeral. She didn't call when Jacob married. She didn't write when I sent her the final update after Mama passed. The silence became mutual. A slow, hard wall built brick by unanswered brick. And now, after all this time, here was her handwriting again. Slanted. Elegant. A little shaky. I held the envelope in both hands like it might burn me. Then I sat down, heart thudding, and opened it. Lorraine, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. I've spent most of my life moving fast and assuming people would understand that meant I cared. But I think I was wrong. I think I hurt you by being absent, and maybe that hurt kept you from leaning on someone who should have been there when you needed it most. I've been following your story quietly. I read the article from the Women's Center website. Yes, it reached Vermont. A friend forwarded it. Said, "This sounds like someone who found herself again." And I thought, that's my sister. I don't want anything, Lorraine.
I swear.
Not money. Not help. Not forgiveness on demand. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. And that if you ever want to visit the coast, there's a room here. With clean sheets. And a pot of coffee just like the one Mama used to make. I know it's late, but I hope it's not too late. Love. Melanie. I read it twice. Then 3 more times. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. Melanie had never apologized before. Not even when we were kids. She always ran, always deflected. But something in that letter felt different.
Raw. True.
And something in me, something I thought was long dead, stirred. Not a yearning, a wondering. Could you reclaim not just your identity, but your history? Could you reopen a door without stepping into pain? That night, I called Ella. She answered on the second ring. Grandma? I got a letter, I said. From someone I didn't think I'd hear from again. She paused. Is it good? I'm not sure yet, I said. But it made me think. About what? I smiled into the phone. About how the heart doesn't forget, even if the mind tries to. We talked for nearly an hour. About school. About her plan to visit the women's house and start volunteering. About the lemon tree she wanted to plant in the backyard, even though she knew the frost might kill it. I just want to try, she said. Sometimes the hardest things are the ones worth doing. She didn't know it, but she was giving me my answer. The next morning, I packed a small bag. 2 books. 1 sweater. A tin of tea leaves.
And a letter of my own.
Not a reply yet, but something to bring with me. Because for the first time in decades, I was going to see my sister. I didn't tell Jacob. I didn't tell Denise. They had their chapters. This one was mine. As I boarded the bus to Vermont, the spring sun warming my shoulders, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, "You are not what they remember. You are who you've become." And I carried that truth with me like armor. Because forgiveness wasn't a gift I owed. It was a bridge I could choose to cross. The bus ride to Vermont was long, winding, and quiet, just the way I needed it to be. Outside the window, the trees blurred past like years. I watched the landscape change slowly from the familiar to the unfamiliar, as if the road itself were peeling back the layers of the woman I used to be. It had been over 2 decades since I'd last seen Melanie. The memory was fuzzy. A Thanksgiving visit, maybe. She'd arrived late, brought store-bought pie, kissed my cheek like she was just passing through. She always was. But that was before. Before silence, before resentment, before the kind of absence that makes a room colder even when it's full. Now, I stood on her porch, suitcase in hand, heart beating a little too loudly in my chest. The door opened before I could knock. She looked older. And so did I. But her eyes were still the same green flecked with gold, the same ones that used to squint when she laughed too hard. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't dramatic. No sobbing. No whispered apologies. Just 2 sisters, breathing the same air for the first time in years. I made the coffee, she said finally. Like Mama used to. Stovetop. Burnt the first batch, of course. I smiled. She always did. We sat on her porch as the sun lowered into the trees. She told me about the farm she helped manage now. Goats, mostly. And a few chickens that thought they ran the place. I told her about the brownstone. About Russell's letter. About Ella. When I mentioned the women's circle, the table reclaimed, her face softened. That sounds like something we both needed years ago, she said. I nodded. I think I'm just now starting to understand how long I lived small. And I made it easier, she admitted. By not being there. By assuming you didn't need me just because you never asked. I looked at her for a long time. We were both taught that love meant service, and that needing anything back was weakness.
But it's not, she said.
It's honesty. We let the silence stretch between us, this time not as punishment, but as peace. A bridge rebuilt. I stayed for 4 days. We cooked.
We laughed.
We sat in the quiet and remembered our mother, not just the version who taught us to work, but the woman who hummed Patsy Cline while ironing, who left notes in our lunchboxes. We grieved her together, for the first time in decades. When I finally packed my things, Melanie walked me to the porch. I'm not disappearing again, she said. I know I've said that before, but I mean it now. I know, I said. And I don't need you to prove it. I just need you to keep showing up. She nodded, and I hugged her goodbye, this time with both arms. Back at the brownstone, the mailbox was full. A stack of envelopes from the women's group. Notes from Ella. A card from the librarian at the community center, hand-drawn flowers on the front, a thank you scrawled inside for the new collection of books I donated anonymously in Walter's name. But the letter that stopped me cold was tucked inside a lavender envelope. From Ella. I opened it slowly. Grandma, I wanted to tell you something I didn't know how to say that night at dinner. When you left, it scared me. Not because you were gone, but because I realized I'd been living like you would never leave. You taught me love by showing up. Now, I want to learn how to give it back by listening. I don't want to become a woman who forgets the roots that held her up. Thank you for not rescuing me. Thank you for teaching me how to see. I love you.
Ella.
I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Walter's picture. Then I walked to the garden and checked on the lemon tree we had planted the week before. It hadn't bloomed yet, but the soil was rich, and the roots were taking. That evening, I hosted the table reclaimed again. We were up to 13 women now. A few brought granddaughters. Others brought stories. One brought a photo album with pages so worn the corners curled like flower petals. We sat in the circle as the sun dipped through the windows. And as the candles flickered, I stood and read the final line from my nearly finished memoir. The quietest women often carry the loudest legacies, because while the world forgets the hands that build it, the ones they've held never do. There were tears, but mostly there was warmth and laughter, and women sitting at a table where they weren't required to shrink. Later that night, I stood on the porch under the stars. I thought about all the versions of me this house had held already. The invisible caretaker, the returned matriarch, the reluctant warrior, the writer. I wasn't the woman they remembered anymore. I was the woman I finally became. Not loud, but lasting. And somewhere out there, the roots were still spreading. Even if no one saw them. Even if no one said thank you. They held. And this time, I held too. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And tell us, who's the quiet woman in your life who deserves to be seen?